Molweni Bakaya. I want to thank you for giving me a little bit more of your time. I always say it because time is the one commodity that we don't get back. No matter what we do, we can't reverse time. We can't go fix anything that went wrong in years that have gone by or days that have gone by. And the value of history in the past is that it tells us how we've grown as human beings. And so when we are here in the present, dealing with the challenges that we're dealing with in our daily lives respectively, and how we are collectively thrown into this society, community, by the momentum of history, migration of people. So when I thank you for your time, I'm taking that into account, that you could have been somewhere else, you could be doing something else, and you've chosen to click and see what I'm talking about. So I sincerely do appreciate it. I hope that you're well. I hope that you are hopeful. It's important when things are not going well to be hopeful. Gratitude is a very useful tool to mine hope. You know, we look at the state of African descendants across the whole continent, and specifically here in South Africa, because I'm here in Komani, because I'm back here. Yeah, we come from a brutal past. The last 400, 500 years, instigated by the European civilization. The Arabs had already taken the northern tip of Africa, and the African descendants had to migrate down to make space for them. So the African civilization has been losing ground for thousands of years. And it begs the question, well, how did it happen that we had the land in the first place? Sheikh Anta Diop, who haunts me every day with the African Renaissance, the idea of an African cultural revolution that ends in the next great African civilization. I'm really grateful to the work that Sheikh Anta Diop did, and he proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Egyptians who built the pyramids were Africans, look like me. It's important to know that one fact, because then we then have to take responsibility for enslaving the Jews. The descendants of Moses today haven't forgotten, and I'm sure our stance on Palestine as Africans also doesn't help that. So I can understand why America has no love for Africa, and that's okay. You know, we're all human. Our past matters to us. The injustices of every person's past is always going to be more important to them than the injustices of another people. And until they're satisfied that that ill that was done to them has been satisfied, there will be no peace with the descendants of those perpetrators. South Africa is jammed in that predicament right now, and I feel like we're not having a holistic enough conversation about the land in South Africa. Because to talk about the land in South Africa, we have to talk about the land in Africa first, the entire continent. The nations that we talk about today, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Rwanda, Ethiopia, those weren't countries before Europeans arrived in Africa. So if we want to talk about an authentic Africa, if we want to have an African revolution, we have to start from where we left off, not where the Europeans left off. And where we left off, there were no individual land rights that arbitrarily separated people. In the time that the Europeans arrived here, we even gave you land, and it wasn't enough. And I understand that because Europe naturalistically is poor, and the European civilization exported the world everybody else in exchange for the natural resources of their colonies. So when we embarked on the constitutional dispensation that we're living in now, we decided we're going to forgive because our elders, those who fought for, died for, suffered for the Constitution here in South Africa and everywhere else in the African continent, all had an understanding of the community of humanity. Even though our history is not broadcast in mainstream media, our actual history, not the European history in Africa, we're missing out on the paradigms that our ancestors have passed down to us in our DNA. I, for example, love traveling, so I cross borders. My partner and my 14-year-old are in Zanzibar for most of the time. I travel as much as I can to go spend time with them. They come to South Africa, back to South Africa to come spend time with me and the rest of the family. And we're experiencing a lot of the same things there that we're experiencing here, from an African culture perspective. Our 14-year-old has had a terrible time adjusting to the chauvinism of the men in Zanzibar. And it's a complex issue because Zanzibar is predominantly Islamic, and that's the Arab influence. And you can see the difference between the African Islamic community that we found ourselves in when we were in Zanzibar. Very different from that of the Arab Islamic people. I'm quite sure that a lot of the same things happen because they happen in every culture, everywhere in the world. The shadows of humanity. But if I look at the social cohesion and structure and vision and execution of the Arabic people, the Middle Eastern Islamic people, I want Africa to work that way. I want every African to have a share in the African continent, and their lives must reflect the wealth of the continent. That it makes sense. I like what President Paul Kagame is doing in Rwanda. He's been in power for a very long time. And Rwanda is growing sustainably. I've seen the headlines about President Paul Kagame and his term. I've heard people and seen people arguing that he lacked the virtues of President Nelson Mandela, and he's actually got a beautiful response to that, if you care to look it up. Muammar Gaddafi did some exceptional work when he was still alive and in leadership. We can only imagine what a man like Thomas Sankara could have achieved, but we already know what he did in a short period of time. Yeah, I think Nkuruma, he had it spot on. Yeah, there's everyone who's ever really loved this continent has always told us where to start and how to go about it, and it's always the people. And there's a lot of conversations that I've had with leaders in South Africa, and they predominantly always cite a lack of leadership as the reason why South Africa has issues. And I've never agreed with that fully. As somebody who has led before, as somebody who is capable of leading, as somebody who is leading right now in this conversation and dialogue that I am starting about the state of Komani, but only as a precursor for a conversation about the whole continent. The African Union's Agenda 2063 and the aspirations of a self-determined, free, culturally evolved, industrially developed, and plugged into the information age. We want to go to space as well, and we also want to play with rockets. And by 2063, according to the African Union's projections, we're going to get that. We're going to do that. And I believe that, and I'm working towards that, and that's why I'm having this conversation. The thing I know, though, as a leader, is that you're leading people. You're not leading concepts. You're not leading organizations. You're not leading campaigns. You're not leading commodities. You're not a captain of industry. What are you? You're leading human beings. And on this continent, primarily African human beings. So people never really speak with the people. I'm not saying speak to the people. I'm saying speak with the people. Spend some time listening. I was on a call with a fantastic scholar of South African economy, but African and global naturally to contextualize it, because the economy is an ecosystem like everything else in the human and world cycles. There's a growing conversation about the education of the masses. And I'm saying it's growing not to undermine what it was. We've always been having this conversation. The youth of 76, prime example, that we've always been having this conversation ever since the apartheid government decided to slant the resources to the European descendants in South Africa, leaving the majority of the indigenous African descendants to work with scraps, essentially. So education in South Africa has always been a thing. Education on the continent has always been a thing, because since colonialism, the education systems have been premised on the European civilization. So there is an inherent legitimacy issue with South Africa's society, and that's the reason why people don't respect the Constitution, plain and simple. It's a legitimacy case. Why should I observe the law in the Constitution when the European descendants have not restored that which was illegally obtained? And whatever constructs of the legality of the apartheid system, because of the instruments that declared it a state and the acceptance by the international community of those instruments, as an indictment on the rest of the world, not on Africans. We weren't stupid, we weren't gullible, we weren't weak. We just understood that that path is not sustainable, and it's the reason why we're still just asking for peace. We're asking for you to just pay back the resources so that we can reconfigure this continent to a way that actually works for this continent. Having this conversation is career suicide. I am unemployable. I made peace with that a couple of years ago, so I left employment then. I've been reluctant to have this conversation because it's not just an economic conversation that I'm having, it's also a social one. I have to talk about us as well as Africans and the consequences of colonialism and apartheid, how it fractured our families, how it fractured our communities, and how that is the true cause of the state of our people, the lack of our awareness of our history, which is why we're having these very, very sad scenes and rhetorics of foreign nationals in South Africa and paras and illegal immigrants, when every single African state contributed to the apartheid government giving the land back. The people that we are throwing out of our country, sometimes even murdering, the people that we speak so illy of, as if they are foreign. These people are not only the people who helped us get our land back, but in a time before the Europeans arrived here, when we were able to move freely, as we still are, actually, we were welcomed wherever they dwelled, and they were welcome where we dwelled. The same way the Europeans will welcome every other being, whether it was an African, whether it is an Arab, it didn't matter. This is a very sensitive conversation because it's personal to every single person in South Africa. And that's why an instrument like the Constitution of South Africa that was promulgated in 1996 is put in place or implemented. It is intended to be the social contract between every person that is in South Africa and any person that is dealing with a person in South Africa. So when we're having these conversations, that should be the departure point. And when we go back to the Constitution and we look at why it was created at the time that it was created, we were coming out of apartheid. I remember when Komani was killed. I remember helicopters flying over head here, Komani, in Victoria Park, where I live, close to the Dumpy Adams, where we started the cleaning campaign. I was there toying in the streets as well. But I didn't understand what was happening. I was just a part of the dancing and the singing. And I was caught up in the energy, in the spirit of our people. Because we mourned a significant loss that day. And we're still suffering the consequences of that now. The same way we're still suffering the consequences of the death of Steve Biko, the same way we're suffering the consequences of the vitality of the Robben Island prisoners. You know, what their capacity of mind and will achieved in fighting the apartheid system, if that was used constructively for building the economy and infrastructure of South Africa and integrating it with the rest of the African continent, we're still suffering the consequences of that lost time now. A couple of years ago, in the chairman's address, Johan Rupert said something that for me was a game changer, because this is the reason why I can't engage to the depth required with European descendants who live in South Africa about the politics of our country. You know, the European descendants in South Africa speak a lot about how they've been here for generations and how this is home. And yet in all of that time, the majority of them cannot speak an African language. They don't spend any significant time in African communities. They have no true, real connection to the people, the descendants of the people who were found here by your ancestors. You don't take the time to learn about us. You still haven't understood Ubuntu in all of the generations that you've been here. And it's the reason why all of you live in fear. Because you know that if the roles were reversed, you would feel exactly the same way. And as a matter of fact, because of your DNA, because of your history, because of the militancy of European descendants, you most certainly would have waged war already. So as far as the European descendant is concerned, it's inevitable. It's just a matter of time before we do what we should have done already, according to some. But Ubuntu is the community of humans. A child is a child, whether they are in Zambia, whether they are in Seoul, whether they are in Romania, whether they are in South America, whether they are Aboriginal. Like, it doesn't matter. A child is a child. They need to eat. They need to learn how to fend for themselves in this world. They need to know what they can eat, what they shouldn't eat. They need to learn how to live their lives in a useful way so that they can get the most out of their finite lifespan, because we're all going to die. So this whole idea of ownership that the European civilization is based on comes from the poverty of the European region. You've done exceptionally well in Europe with the wealth of the rest of the world. I thoroughly enjoy Europe. I intend to enjoy it even more because they really did well with our wealth. They really did. And so in order to enjoy my ancestors' wealth, I'm going to go enjoy it in Europe. I'm going to do that thing. I also want to spend a bit more time in the East. I actually want to travel the whole world. And I don't want to have a visa. I want to be able to just move according to the terrain as it guides me. And I want to be able to go all around the world without having to answer to people in uniforms. It would be ideal for me if we were serious about devolving the powers of state and giving them over to the people. And I think that's what President Paul Kagame has been able to do exceptionally well. Whereas the European structure is hierarchical, the African structures have always been circular. Nothing is more important than anything else in an ecology. Because it's a part of the system, it's a part of one thing, it's an ecology. One needs the other to live and function the way that it was intended to function and live. So the departure point for the European civilization is self-determination, it is self-preservation, it is survival of the fittest. It is based on competition, and the perversion of competition becomes brutality and tyranny. And that's what America and NATO have been doing for a very, very long time now. And it has to stop. And I can't stop it anywhere else in the world, but I'd like to stop the European civilization here, Komani, and then spread it from here. So my intention in starting the cleaning campaign was to have a clean Komani, so that in a clean Komani and with the people of Komani who have cleaned it, because that process in and of itself is going to change us as people. My intention is still to bring a festival to Komani and the villages and farms along the R392 all the way to Dordrecht. I want to invite 120,000 African descendants proportionately for wherever they are in the world. It should be 130,000 actually, if we're trying to get a rounded percentage of the African descendants all across the world. So for me, it would be proportionately making tickets available to the different communities of African descendants everywhere in the world. And then have them all come through to Kwabantu, which is what I call Komani, the villages, the farms, all the way to Dordrecht, Kwabantu, the home of people. And in coming here, they're coming to experience Ubuntu, which means that the process of cleaning Komani makes of us a people who must learn to work together as a community outside of the structures of government now, and sit as the people who live here and must drive on these roads and must go to these hospitals and must sit without lights. We need to come together, come to an agreement that it is no longer a part of the culture of Komani to live in a polluted state. We are a clean people. Clean. You can see the towel hanging there. Clean. We're a clean people. In order to be clean outwardly, you must be clean inwardly. You must, in your internal representation of the space that you're existing in, it must be clean. Inside your mind. And then, when it's not clean, your body is going to move to make it clean. And then you're going to come back and sit and you're going to look at it and say, yes, this is the place befitting of a person in the community of Komani. That's the culture of Komani. You know, once we've been able to bring ourselves to believe that and express that in how we move, nobody's going to drive through Komani and throw papers out of the window. Because when they're driving in their cars and they're opening the window to throw out, they'll realize that the thing that they're doing is foreign. They can't see it anywhere else. And if it is so habitual to them to do that, then they're going to toss it. But it shouldn't be long before somebody stops them and says, "Ay, don't do that. Don't do that. You come here bringing your rubbish from wherever you came from and you come throw it here on our streets. Do you see rubbish on these streets? Please go pick up your papers. Don't do that again. Don't do that here. Don't do it anywhere else. Respect yourself, man. You're going to drive down the street again one day. What's it going to look like if everybody's doing the thing you're doing? Don't do that. And even in saying that, then we must ask a question is, where did you learn to do that thing? So that we can understand the person, so that they can understand themselves. Let them trace it back to the place where it started, where it became acceptable to throw something out of the window. Or as you walk, to just drop something that is not going to organically become a part of the environment that you're throwing it in. Where did that start? And that story goes all the way back to apartheid and colonialism. And however much people might be tired of having this conversation, until we have it openly and honestly, until we're willing to reflect on ourselves deeply to understand why it is we think the way we think. Because the way we think informs the way we behave. way we speak, and the way we move. Now, we can't fix the past, as I'm going to continue to say. I'm going to repeat it a lot because it's important for us to understand that we can't change the past. We can only learn from it. If you want to live a fulfilling life, think about the kind of Komani you'd like to live in. Think about the kind of Eastern Cape you'd like to live in. Think about the kind of South Africa you'd like to live in. Think about the kind of Africa you'd like to live in, and then think about the kind of world you'd like to live in. And when you have a picture of that, then you take a pen and you write down everything you have there, everything you see, everything you hear, everything you experience, that you taste, that you smell, all the places that you're able to go, exhilaration, doing something that's exciting. I want to go to space. I want to play in space. I want to go for weeks and months. And I want to do it from Africa, with Africans, or by myself, which I enjoy as well. So everything that I do fantasizing about the next great African civilization. I'm fantasizing about this cultural revolution that Sheikh Anta Diop spoke about, which he based on the European Renaissance. How they became free. How they became self-determinant. How they shook off the sheikhs and the kings. But they held on to the legacies. They held on to the patterns of thinking. They held on to the hierarchical structures. And it's the reason why Europe has such a high suicide rate. I had a conversation with a European young woman one day, and I wasn't aware of the fact that Europe has one of the highest suicide rates in the world. And I did a bit of research on it, but what she had told me was that in her experience, her suicidal thoughts came from the amount of pressure there is in Europe to live a certain way, to perform a certain kind of a way, to have access to certain kind of resources which you have to perform in a specific way to achieve. And it means 3 jobs. It means having to study extraordinarily hard because 50% isn't enough, 60% isn't enough. There's a kid who's getting 90 and there's so many of them. And so she says the pressure is so high, the feeling of not being good enough is so common that people talk about it and everybody feels the same way, and eventually everybody's like, well, clearly there's nothing we can do about it, let's kill ourselves. Is life worth living, or should I kill myself? I think that's the only question really that philosophy boils down to. Is life worth living, or should I kill myself? A lot of people are antsy about death, particularly within the European framework. A lot of Africans, because we've adopted a European framework, in African culture, life never ends. Human consciousness never ceases or ends. It flows into the ether as a form, much like God, that is everywhere all the time. And we are capable of communicating with it, and it is capable of communicating with us as an ancestor. So, we lost a lot through colonialism and apartheid as African descendants. We still have fragments of it in our existing communities, in our attitudes, in our proclivities even. And I feel like a departure point for that is, every individual has to take this journey by themselves, this pilgrimage within themselves, to understand who they are. The Xhosa people have and always have had the same ethos as any divine nation, which is you must know yourself. Knowing yourself is the highest form of wisdom. Understanding why it is you do the things you do, when you do them, and where you do them, under the conditions which you do them. Paying that much attention to yourself, your mind, your thoughts, your behavioral patterns, the response that you get from your environment. Having that kind of self-awareness, that's when you reach the status of a person with estima. The closest word that I can find to translate estima is gravitas, a universal attractiveness, because you've mastered universal humanity in essence. So estima is beautiful quality. Jesus had it, the Buddha had it, Muhammad had it. Many charismatics, the Dalai Lama, many African kings. Paul Kagame has it, Mandela had it, Biko had it, Thomas Sankara had it, Gaddafi had it, Fidel Castro had it, Che Guevara had it, Jomo Kenyatta had it, Haile Selassie had it, and I mean we can just keep on going, like keep on going. Lumumba now, the existing Lumumba, the Kenyan legal scholar and advocate for a united Africa. I shared also a post on the Komani Fest group, a post of the Penwell podcast. Penwell's a very dear friend of mine. He has been calling me a loser for a very long time, pretty much for as long as he's known me, because he sees my potential and he thinks I'm squandering it. He sees my capacity to lead and he thinks I'm weak for not leading it and seizing it and making use of the opportunities that I've had to learn all of the things that I've learned. He introduced me actually, and I met on the one day Mr. Maponga, Elder Maponga actually is more accurate. Fantastic man, always present, mind always taking a million places at once, incredible source of knowledge, progressive in his thinking. I can relate deeply with him in his transition from Christianity into African spirituality. I took a detour through Eastern spiritual practices, 10-day silent meditation retreats, and they helped me actually understand ancestors as the consciousness of God. That's a powerful statement. Let me say that again. Ancestors are the consciousness of God. If we look at, or at least the creative consciousness of God, the way that I understand God is everything. Cool, I can accept that premise. And if we're talking about it from a conceptual perspective, God is everything. So whether it is an animate object or an inanimate object, whether it is conscious in our understanding of it and the ability to communicate, of which everything that breathes communicates in one form or another, because even with humans we don't just communicate with words, right? We communicate with behaviors, body language, expressions. And Elder Maponga had the courage to walk away from Christianity without criticizing it harshly. because he also understands the truth in the doctrine itself. Amidst the politicking, so I can connect and relate deeply with Elder Mabonga just from that base alone, and then obviously he's had his own life experiences which then fill in that story. But an African man coming out of a colonial mindset who has now drank from the Kool-Aid, the waters of African civilization, African philosophy, indigenous African knowledge systems, and he's also, like myself, gone back home to Zimbabwe. I'm coming back home to Komani, and there's a cultural revolution that's taking place. I can see it in so many people. Penwell himself has had an extraordinary journey. The time is ripe for African descendants to believe that there is sufficient value in our narrative without deleting anything. Everything about who we are right now is not shameful. If anything, it's the opposite. You know, Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." The meek are people who understand war and violence, but choose not to. People who are able to practice it, but choose not to. And Africans are that kind of a people. And we should be proud of our attitudes. They call us lazy, and they work their whole lives to have enough money to buy a sufficient piece of land so that they can enjoy themselves and rest. And we're saying, no, but the land is here. Just do the thing, we'll help you, we share, and then you go about your business, and we'll go about our business. I don't understand. Why must you go through all these rigmaroles of education systems and 20 years here and this and that and the other and qualifications? Just do the thing. Let's see if you can do it or not. If you can't, let's help you out. So yeah, Mr. Mabonga J gave each of us this thing, and I've kept it not because of the value of the dollar itself, but the value in him giving it away, because it means so little to him. And I'm excited about the future of Africa. I'm excited about cryptocurrency. I'm excited about blockchain technology. There's a man in Johannesburg, a genius that you're yet to meet or know about, but he's busy developing some pretty powerful processing mechanisms that I know are going to be the freight trains that are going to help us surpass the rest of the world. I keep making what people call outlandish statements, delusions of grandeur, and I'm just like, no, this is not about me, this is about us. I am talking about our capacity as African descendants. You know, European descendants have been with us, slaughtering us for hundreds of years, and we haven't retaliated except in extreme circumstances. But for the most part, we're just like, can we just live in peace, guys? Just give back what you stole. We're not going to chase you away. You know, but then you've got to start thinking like we think. You've got to start seeing this land as all of our land. You've got to start seeing its wealth as all of our wealth. You can't believe that you must leave here and go to a heaven. You can't believe that. You've got to believe that this is heaven here. It even says so in the book of Revelations. It doesn't say that you're going to leave earth and go to heaven. No. It says there will be a new heaven and a new earth. So don't go chasing waterfalls and you can't swim. You know? Play here with us. We'll show you a few things about life, how you can actually enjoy life. Here with us. No problems. Just get off your high horse. You know, leave that hierarchical thinking behind. And just come as a human being and let's have a conversation about how we're going to clean Komani. And then from there start planning a festival so that we can show people how we fix this place in a year into a state where we're happy to welcome them here and say, come party with us. Bring your best minds, come tell us stories for 10 days. Let's sit, let's walk, let's listen, let's speak, let's perform. Let's showcase the beauty of the African people to the African people. And for the beginnings of this African Renaissance community, which I am building, and the festival that is going to be its key property, or that is its flagship property or asset, the Ark Pilgrimage Festival. This festival for me is a pilgrimage. It's African descendants coming from every corner of the world to African land to come and say, hey man, my name is Edward Cameron Beveridge. I am from Komani. I've been fortunate enough to live in many places in South Africa and visit many other places around the world. There's a lot of trauma that we have experienced in Komani. We've done exceptionally well to maintain peace in Komani. We haven't, though, as yet, taken advantage of the peace that we have to be able to have the dialogues about the respective needs on either side of community fences, so that we can share the resources that are in each corner of our community, to ensure that there is an ecosystem that is not poor, but people know how to live productively. There's a place for everybody where you can add value, and for that value you will get value in exchange. You know, that's all it takes, really. You know, just making that paradigm shift, and not thinking from a departure point of self-preservation, but moving from a departure point of there's a community and humanity. That's all it is. And then you can develop your policies and processes and systems after you've come to that agreement that, first and foremost, until all children are safe, until all children have a good quality education, until all children, when they mature, will have a place where they can express themselves, we've all got work to do. We must invest in each other. And so Ubuntu is a prerequisite to have Istima, and Istima is a prerequisite to uphold Ubuntu. And so again, I'm going to say, we have a painful and pitiful past, very sad, very ignorant and stupid, short-sighted. And let's not continue in it any further, because we've continued a lot of those practices, a lot of those attitudes, a lot of those patterns of thinking. And cleaning Komani for me is the first step towards that festival. My partner, my 14-year-old daughter, and I are going to be traveling from Ethiopia back to South Africa. We're going to go through about 7 or 8 African countries doing that. I want to go get an endorsement from the African Union for this African Renaissance community, the Ark, and this festival, the Ark Pilgrimage Festival, and the Komani Heritage Festival, which I've built the group for with the cleaning campaign. That would be the second festival, you know, a precursor, a soft launch for the international one, and this one would be for South Africans to come through and experience what we have done in Komani with Ubuntu and Istima. And then in December, we can then have the 130,000 African descendants from every corner of the world coming to experience each other in our home at Kwabantu. In order to do that, we're going to have to build thousands of accommodation units. Tens of thousands. There are many that exist already. In my mind, it only makes sense that, you know, people must come live in our homes. You know, when I played sport growing up here at Queen's College, and we used to go play in Port Elizabeth, we used to get hosted. And you go to stay with a family of the guy you're playing against tomorrow. And it was fantastic because you build relationships that way, right? It's absolutely brilliant. So, for the festival, I have that in mind as well. I mean, we've seen with Airbnb that sharing that can help and happen already. Let's use that in our own platform here, Komani, where we're just like, okay, we're going to put some money in your pockets, make as many rooms in your home available as possible. And I mean, people are really only going to be sleeping there, spending a couple of hours washing, eating, whatever the case might be. And then they're going to be out in the streets, moving from Queenstown all of the way to Dordrecht, experiencing all of the installations that tell the story of the African people along this corridor, particularly the South African story, but also looking into the migration of the African people over the generations. And that's where the endorsement from the African Union for me becomes pertinent, because having that seal from the authority on Africa, which is how I view the African Union, and that is going to be the seat of the first government of the entire African continent as a whole. I'd like to see President Paul Kagame sitting in that seat. We can give him 15, 20 years, or at least as long as he still feels like he has the vitality for it. And I'd happily serve President Paul Kagame in the capacities that I am now. I wouldn't want to be told what to do. I would want to continue to help people actualize their dreams, which is what I do as a life coach and a performance coach. You want to bat and get certain number of runs. You want to sing a certain kind of way. You want to perform on a certain stage. You want to occupy a particular office. You can do it. If you're willing to make the changes required inside yourself, you can become whatever you want. My father told me that, and I used that to become a professional rugby player. I've gotten every job that I've actually really ever wanted. I've been able to travel the world, which I thoroughly enjoy, because my father told me continuously and repetitively that I could do whatever I wanted. And he backed it up with actions when I wanted to leave Komani as a 12-year-old boy, because I wanted to go play rugby in Cape Town, because it made sense to me in terms of getting to becoming a Springbok. My dad moved our family from the Eastern Cape to Cape Town, and that's why we spent so much time away from here. And in that time, I went to a fantastic school in Stellenbosch and Porus, and then I moved on to a fantastic institution in Stellenbosch as well, with the University of Stellenbosch. I had some exceptional experiences, made history with the school and the university on respective fronts. I've been able to meet some really extraordinary human beings, presidents and captains of industry and phenomenal sporting stars and musicians and artists and people who create fantastic technological things, and I'm not particularly interested in that, but I appreciate the value it adds to my life. And so I praise every person who's contributed to me being who I am, because those are the roots of where I come from here. There was always, when I grew up here, a hierarchy of respect, but respect nonetheless, and it was a reciprocal one. I remember my uncles been very rude, very crass, the Xhosas, very much like Afrikaans, and how visceral it is as a language. And I had both growing up, all three with English, which is, the more sophisticated one, but at least according to the European standards. Komani made me. I was fashioned here. And I have put myself in extraordinary places because I believed I could do it. And my father helped me realize that by moving to places that feed the things you want, you can honestly become that thing in no time. So with all of the blessings and privileges that I've had from having a grandfather who is a European descendant as well, who even throughout apartheid, a part of my bloodline has never been enslaved. So I'm a free-thinking man because it's in my DNA. At no period in time in recent history, when people talk about apartheid, I get that from my mothers. The women in my family were Xhosa. Both of them have passed, my mother and my grandmother, and obviously everybody growing up. Grandmothers. So I'm an African man and a European descendant in part. And just the thinking that my father has, entrepreneur, business owner, can't work for another human being, self-determination, the way that he encouraged me in the institutions he put me in, I understand the European civilization. I understand its processes and systems. I see its shortfalls. And the rest of the world has the cure for the ailments of the European civilization. If you would just stop trying to bully your way into our homes, whether it be on our TVs, whether it be on our radios, whether it be on billboards on our roads, whether it be in our parliaments and our social structures. Just cease and desist, man. Just stop. And take the time to understand the places where you are as a European descendant. The blood that was spilt on that land for you to build what you're building. Israel is still relentless with Palestine right now. And it's not disputable. You built your synagogue on a mosque. And God's identity doesn't change because, of the constructs of the European civilization. Everything doesn't change because Europe decides that ecology is not important, that humanity is only for the period that you are here and then you are done, which informs their anarchist philosophies. I know I'm shitting on the European descendants a lot. It might sound that way, but I'm just speaking the truth though. If I'm lying about anything I've said, that's one thing. If my inferences and my attitudes are offensive, let's have that conversation, but you can't dispute the truth of what I'm saying if you properly reflect. And so for African descendants, you have no reason to feel ashamed. Sad, yes. Angry, yes. Disappointed, all of the negative emotions, you're welcome to feel them. It's justifiable. Shame shouldn't be one of them, yes. And we've made some pretty horrific mistakes, and we've built some pretty toxic cultures as African men, and African women have become twice as toxic because they have the fluidity to be able to take on masculine and feminine traits with a lot more acceptability, a lot less friction than men are able to take on feminist traits. And so they're always going to dominate us if we want to play in the dark, if we want to be dishonest, if we don't want to have istima. Women are always going to punish us, and we're like dogs as men. No matter, I remember we had a Rottweiler, and hated us leaving the house. Absolutely lost his shit. Absolutely hated it. And then you'd throw it a biscuit, open the back door, throw it a couple of biscuits to keep it busy, close the door, and then leave. And even though he knows what's about to happen, she knows what's about to happen, she's still gonna go for the fucking biscuit. She's still gonna get left behind for a fucking biscuit. When we're going to the beach, we're gonna go eat in a restaurant. Knows it's a good time. And because of the image of poverty that is perpetually put in the media about Africans because of the continuous barrage of crying wolf and corruption in Western media. The African doesn't recognize that in the last 400 years, at the very least, we have a moral high ground. And just for the 400 years, because before that, then we were doing the same things just amongst ourselves, the same way the Europeans were doing it amongst themselves before they spread their war machines across the world. Yeah. But anyway, there's a couple of things I want to leave you with. The first is that this conversation is pertinent and it has to be had. I've put it off for a very, very long time because I know what it's like to speak publicly and what people make of you. With the little bit of success that I've had in my life already, and how people are drawn towards successful people, and the expectations that people have, I had to be sure that I wanted to put myself in that position again. I needed to be sure that when I start this thing that I'm starting, and I do this thing that I'm doing, and it becomes the thing that I'm saying now that it's going to become. Along that journey, the more that this thing becomes a reality, people are going to start wanting to make contact. People who have known me and haven't spoken to me in a long time, they're going to start calling again. People that I don't know are going to want to get to know me. And it's fair, right? Because the things that I'm doing are exciting. Cleaning in Komani is something that every single person feels strongly about that I have spoken to. So when I say, let's clean Komani, people aren't following me. People are doing something that they've had in their mind to do for a long time. They just needed somebody who had the courage to say, hey, let's do this thing. And then beyond the courage, because I did it, I said, let's clean Komani. Komani is still not clean. A lot of people would have said I failed. And I'm going to be like, cool. You thought I was finished. You thought I was finished. No, there's another 365 days after the last Heritage Day. And we're in that cycle now. So I was off by a year. And I wasn't off because I didn't plan properly. I was off because I knew that I needed to set off that gun first to see how everybody responds. Now that I've seen how everybody responds, now I can start working with the people who've showed up. But it's not enough to just work with the people who've shown up already. If Komani is going to be clean and stay clean, every person in Komani has to think a certain way about Komani's pollution or its cleanliness. So for the next 350 whatever years, days, until the next Heritage Day, I'm going to figure out with the people who are showing up how we're going to get the message to everybody else. How we're going to get everybody else to see all of the benefits of changing our culture to one of cleanliness. And then, like I said, in that process, we're going to find all of the tools we need to turn Kwabantu into an ecology that is self-sustainable for everybody who is currently here and for our growth projections going forward. I am traveling to Ethiopia to go and seek resources about the history of Africa as a whole, because there's too much. I can't do all that research by myself. And so for anybody else who has an interest in Africa, the African Renaissance, an African cultural revolution, a return of the equity and the wealth of the land of Africa to the people of Africa, if you believe in the restitution of the African descendants to the African land, and for a transformation from a European civilization into an African civilization, an African way of doing things, an African worldview, an African belief system, an African identity, an African value system, an African rail system that goes across the whole continent, freight systems across the whole world. naval systems that are able to cross and traverse the entire waters of the planet. If you believe that every human being has the same natural capacity to harness the power within themselves and the power and the energy of the people and the environment around them for a cause that believes in, or at least serves the belief in, the community of humanity, you will find no resistance from African people. If you're pure in your intentions to serve humanity, I have no problems as an African descendant. But America mustn't come talk to me about democracy. Europe mustn't come talk to me about democracy. China mustn't come talk to me about bilateral agreements. The Arab states, as quiet as they are, just going about their business, they know about Northern Africa. And you guys are saying nothing. And as long as that's your attitude and your position, as the citizens, I'm not even talking about the political structures, I'm not talking about the economic structures, I'm not talking about the judicial structures, I'm talking about you in your house. As an African descendant, as a European descendant, as an Arab descendant, wherever in the world you are, like I said, I enjoy traveling. I enjoyed Europe. America, not so much, but I've been told New York is waiting for me, so I suppose I'll have to go check out New York as well. But I don't want to be limited or restricted in my movements. I am a responsible individual. I understand when I move the fact that I have to respect and honor the culture of the places that I move in. You would do well as European descendants to do the same thing. You would do the same thing as Asian descendants when coming to Africa to do the same thing. The hierarchy that the European civilization placed over humanity, as demonstrated by the apartheid system here, the caste system in India. Why? Why? For what? We've seen in all of the thousands of years of human history from every corner of the world that we're the same thing, man. We all come from ignorance. We don't know. We rely on the knowledge of our ancestors, and we too have a divine responsibility to pass that knowledge on, and we can't mute any of the knowledges of the people. The saddest state of affairs for me is the Aboriginal people and the, let's call it Native Americans. I feel a deep connection to the people on that side, on the northern side of the planet, because Europe did some damage there, like almost irreversible damage to the native people of what is now America, as well as Australasia. I think those are the most successful colonial projects. Africa was too big, we were too many, and in any way, we were the first people, so you'll never be able to dominate us. Even with all of your warfare, you'll corrupt your soul, you'll end humanity, and even you with that anarchist departure point, that is the paradigm of the European civilization, even you know. And that's why your children are fleeing, that's why they're coming to Africa, that's why they're going to India, that's why they're going to South America. They're leaving all of the places that are run according to the rhythm of the poverty of Europe and the departure point of the European civilization, which was poverty. That's the reason why they left with guns, to come and take and steal and rob. And it's okay, if you just open up the borders and we accept a common humanity, communal humanity. Obviously, I understand the requirement for communities to know the people who are in their communities, but that should be happening in every community where a person is coming and intending to stay, whether they're registering into an Airbnb or whether they're registering into a hotel. that information should filter through into a central database that will be able to then in return push to this person based on their profile all of the people that could be relevant to them, so that they have access to the people that they need in the space that they've just moved to. If you're a carpenter, it's useful to know the people who run the hardware